Welcome to a new episode of Outside the Panels with your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to a new episode of Outside the Panels. I'm your host, as always, Johnny the Machine Hughes, and joining me this time around, we have a comic writer par excellence who's decided to pick up the prose and not the comic book. I'm, of course, talking to Fabian Nicieza. Fabian, how's it going?
Well done, Johnny.
Go on.
He was very worried he'd get the name wrong, folks, but he nailed it.
Woo! Happy dance to me. Excellent.
Now, I
Fabian.
want to ask you why the nickname The Machine, but I don't know if the answer would be appropriate in a podcast that's going to discuss Suburban Dicks.
Well, I've got a question about the title of the book, so we'll hold that. So it's a productivity title, and that's kind of it.
Gotcha.
So back when I write reviews for Comic Crusaders when we first started, I was hitting like 6 or 7 reviews a week, and then we started doing podcasts, and because we weren't time zone friendly, the guys in the States would be like saying, let's get together at 10 p.m. EST. I'm like, dude, that's like 3 o'clock in the morning for me. But I never missed one. So it was like, oh, look at Johnny, he's like a machine. And that's kind of
very good.
That's kind of how
that is a worthwhile nickname. I like it.
Yeah. Johnny the Machine Hughes. So we're here to talk about your book. Publication date today, the 22nd of June.
Today is pub day. Yes, it is.
I've done a little bit of research on goodreads.com. Of a score out of 5 stars, you are currently sitting on. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
4.2. 4.2. That's immense.
I looked earlier and I thought it was 4.25. Damn it.
Somebody who hates Deadpool.
Not that I'm keeping track or anything. So far, it's gotten really, really good reviews. Not just from the industry trade publications like Kirkus and Publishers Weekly, but other mystery-related publications, and now the readers who got looks at Advanced Galleys are giving it pretty solid reviews. I'm pretty happy. What they're liking about it is exactly what I was trying to send out. So I'm glad that the people who've been reading it are picking up on that.
So talk to me about the book, Suburban Dicks. One of my colleagues from Comic Crusaders, Nemesis FC2, has asked me the question: why Dicks? Is it about private detectives or is it about male manhood? Which one?
It is an intentional pun on the old nickname for private detectives, and the personality types of the main characters involved. And I originally came up with the entire book concept 1995, because the idea really sprung from things that were happening in my real life, and I came up with an imaginary solution for them, and that was the book's premise and the book's characters and the book's title. Various times I've tried to write it. I had different permutations of the title just because I was always worried that no one would want to, no publisher would want to purchase a book with that name, and then I would be worried about some stores not wanting to rack it. But even when I had other titles in my mind, it always had a subtitle, which was A Suburban Dicks Mystery. So that concept was always coined in my mind since 1995. That it really kind of fit the tone and feel of the story, the books, the characters, and of me as a writer, and now more than ever because of Deadpool's success, kind of how I am known or thought of.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point you bring up, because I've started reading the book. I absolutely loved the main first character who gets killed. I'm not even going to try and attempt to say that person's name. It's like
Sakunanantan Sasmal. Easy.
Yeah, what he said. That's what he said. I like the whole robbed by a spatula. I've worked at a petrol station, like a gas station, in my younger days. I don't think anybody ever tried to rob me with a spatula.
I worked at a 7-Eleven from a midnight to 8 in the morning shift. You don't have 7-Elevens over there, right? But here they're just convenience stores. Okay, and somebody one time wanted to shoplift stuff and rob me, and and he didn't really even have anything. He just held his wallet in his hand. And I said, come on. I said, come on, dude. And he just goes, come on. I go, just go, because we weren't supposed to put up a fight even back then. We're talking about when I was in college. I was working this part-time job. So, you know, anything can be threatening in the hands of a threatening person, right? So in Satku's defense in that opening chapter, it is one of those big, you know, barbecue grilling spatulas with the metal plate at the end. So it's scary.
Not like an egg masher. No, it's a proper.
It wasn't a whisk or anything like that.
I can just imagine someone coming into a 7-Eleven to try and rob the place. I've got an empty wallet. I'm not going to pay for anything.
The wallet was empty. That made it threatening? No, not really.
I've got a huge credit card debt. I'm not buying any more. So you talk about 95. So 95 was probably, arguably, you were in your heyday back then. Back for Marvel, you had Deadpool, you had the X-Books going on. How did this idea for Suburban Dicks then kind of sort of germinate from the kind of, I don't want to say run of the mill stuff, because you know the X stuff.
No,
I
get what you're saying. From working
huge.
in one kind of genre and have an idea for a completely different kind of book. Well, the truth is that even back then, when I was writing 6 books a month and working a full-time job at Marvel, I hesitated becoming an editor at Marvel, shifting over from my advertising manager job, because I didn't want to be editing the same kinds of books I was writing. So the editor-in-chief, Tom DeFalco, had the last laugh, because he gave me the young reader books and all the licensed books, and I had to edit things like Barbie and Ren and Stimpy and things like that. And it was specifically because I wanted to do other things. I didn't just want to be writing or immersed completely in superheroes. And that's a genre that I've grown up in since I was 5 years old. I've been reading superhero comics, but I've always had other interests across the board. And even when I was at Marvel, I often tried to pitch and sell book concepts that were kind of off the beaten path slightly, a little like the work I was doing with Nomad, which at the time I was writing Marvel's #1 selling book, and I was writing Marvel's like 3rd lowest selling book at the same time, and that was Nomad, right? It scratched an itch in me to do different kinds of stories.
So for me, looking at this book, Suburban Dicks, I see lots of Nomad stylings in there, because I've got to say right now, I loved your Nomad's book. I thought Nomad was a clever idea. I thought it was a great way of talking different stories away from the superhero genre. And I absolutely loved that book. I absolutely thought it was the bee's knees. And looking at Suburban Dicks, and you've kind of got that kind of introspection of American suburban life a little bit. I can kind of see that. I've seen other people say, "Oh, you know, there's a little bit of satire in there, so it's like Deadpool." To me, it's not. It's Nomad.
Well, the truth is, it's me, right? That's as simple as you could boil it down. And in some books, I'm able to do more of me than in other books. In some comics, I was able to do, like in the X books, it's incredibly little of me. But in New Warriors, it was a lot of me. You know, and also in Nomad, and things subsequently throughout my career have had more of me in it, because they were the kinds of titles or characters that allowed me to express a little more of myself. You know, Cable and Deadpool, which I wrote for 50 issues, had a tremendous amount of me in it within the context of working on those 2 disparate characters. This is a book pretty much for better or worse, which is all me. Like there was no real need to couch myself and my experiences and my life. So all of it has little things that are plucked out of my day-to-day existence in New Jersey suburbs, my experience working from home and seeing the challenges that my wife and my friends went through when they had to make determinations whether they were going to continue working in their career or whether they were going to stay home and be the quote unquote homemaker. And all of that infuses the characters in the book, and the observations about suburbia are kind of all infused of living in an area for 30 years that has seen demographic shifting going on, having had personal experience with an indifferent police department and an indifferent town government to issues that were affecting the neighborhood I lived in. All of that got kind of mushed together in terms of the original idea, but then in many ways, because my own insecurities and lack of confidence in writing prose is what kept me from doing it for so long. That actually was to the benefit of the book, because I think the amount of time it took gave me greater perspective, greater understanding, and greater empathy for the challenges the characters were going through, and the challenges the township goes through, because I've kind of experienced them, I've lived them. So my goal is always to entertain. Simple as that. I want to entertain the reader. Sometimes that's going to be adventure. Sometimes that's going to be comedy. Sometimes that's going to be social satire. In this particular case, I tried to mix a little of all of it together.
Cool. A heady brew indeed. I remember my last Marvel, I suppose, note is the transvestite, transgendered issue of Nomad. I lost friends because I picked that book up. And I was like,
oh, really? That's kind of sad for your friends, quite frankly.
That's what I was like. I was like, I don't care. Have you seen how great he looks in that pink dress? I'm just going with it.
That was a cross-dressing issue.
He had his hair pushed like on the side, a 90s side pattern thing going on. I was like, you know what? It is what it is. It's great fun. And you know what? I don't miss my friends.
It's amazing that at that exact time that Marvel let me do a cross-dressing issue of Nomad, they weren't letting me do an HIV storyline in Nomad. They weren't going to let me make the character HIV, but they were okay with me doing a self-contained issue where the characters are all cross-dressing. Go figure,
All right, okay. So Suburban Dicks, give us the skinny, give us the lowdown about the book. What's the main premise, so people can kind of get an idea of what's going on?
The story is a 33-year-old pregnant with her 5th child, should have been FBI profiler, who did not become an FBI profiler because she became pregnant with her 1st child, 10 years earlier, and a 29-year-old reporter who won a Pulitzer Prize when he was graduating college for a series of articles that took down the administration of the New Jersey governor. And now, 9 years later, he's working for a weekly local suburban newspaper because he screwed up his 20s big time. So it's the story of two people who both feel they have a lot to prove to themselves about who they should be, getting themselves involved in the murder of a local gas station attendant that the police are saying was robbery, but Andy Stern and Kenny Lee don't think it was robbery. They think it was something that was done in order to continue a long-standing cover-up. So the story unfolds that the murder that took place today is in order to protect a long-standing cover-up that could affect or involve the police department and the local government administration.
Cool. So a lot going on in that book then. I liked how there's a couple of things I want to kind of sort of tease a little bit here. You said that the characters themselves have to prove something to themselves. Andy's got to prove that she's still got the profiling skills. Kenny's got to prove that he's still got his journalistic chops, as it were. Do you see that prove themselves element? You say the book comes from you. Is that you kind of metaphorically saying you need to prove yourself as a prose writer as opposed to being the comic guys?
Well, yes, you could absolutely look at it that way today. But the irony is that I came up with the characters and their motivations in 1995. So, but the truth is that more so Kenny's than Andy's. Andy's really reflective of all the female friends I had in my life then and now, who often had sacrificed their careers, and many of whom had very good careers and very, very good education, and they ended up raising the kids. And how many of them had had internal and external conflicts with that, and how challenging it was for them, because a part of them, no matter what, felt that they weren't doing something that they were really good at, which was the job, the career,
Definitely.
But for me, Kenny was more of my kind of template when I first came up with the character, because I had the incredible good fortune combined with a lot of hard work that I was able to accomplish by the age of 30, 31, 32, what I wanted to do since I was 10 years old. And that was write comic books for Marvel Comics. And having done that at such a young age, and having met the level of quantitative success that we met back then, I often was very, very insecure about what do I do next? Once you've done this, once you've sold 1.6 million comics a month for a year and a half, then what do you do? And that was driving the initial kind of foundation of Kenny. And ironically, 30 years later, I bring experience to that question, what do you do next? Because the answer is you try lots of things, and some things click and some things don't, and you always try different, new, interesting things. And so in essence, me writing prose finally was me making the decision that I was going to try this thing that I always took the easy way out. Every time I tried, I didn't like it, so I stopped. And I didn't like it for very valid reasons. It wasn't very good. I wasn't happy with what I was writing, so I just set it aside. And I had paying work to do, and I could easily justify setting aside a spec book because I have paying work to do, because the bills got to get paid. You got the mortgage, you got the college tuition, you got all of that stuff, right? But by 2017, so many of my peers were writing books and selling books, and the impetus was honestly jealousy. Like they're doing it and I'm not. Why am I not doing it? And the only reason I wasn't doing it is because I was afraid that it wouldn't be good. So I started to work on it, and after a few chapters, I had some people look at it, people I respect. They gave me good feedback, and I said, okay, let's keep going. By the time I got to page 100 of the manuscript, I was very confused because I didn't think it sucked that bad. It's like, even back to my heyday, you got to understand, Johnny, I was at Marvel's advertising manager when we were releasing New Warriors, which was going to be my first mainstream superhero book for Marvel. My internal advertising line that nobody in the office would let me use was, it's not going to suck like you thought it was gonna, right? So when I say I looked at my first 100 pages of my manuscript and I said, that doesn't suck like I thought it was gonna, to me, that's internal praise. I'm actually satisfied with myself, and I'm normally not. So I'm satisfied with myself that it's coming along okay. Something happened in the last 20 years that made me have a better affinity for writing prose that wasn't going to make me wretch, So I wasn't trying to do a bad James Ellroy voice. I wasn't trying to be authorial. I wasn't trying to be some highfalutin writer. I wasn't trying to write in an iambic pentameter. I just decided that I was going to write it clean and kind of simple and basic, and I wasn't going to abandon my sarcasm, my cynicism, my sense of humor, combined with my sense of optimism and hope. And that's all in the book. All of that is in there.
So I've got to ask, the idea germinates back in the 90s. A lot of stuff has happened in that time. Do you think that the societal changes that have occurred, good and bad, across the world, do you feel that gives the book more resonance, especially with the diverse cast of characters you've got going on in there?
Yeah, I think it does. The diversity of the cast is a natural outgrowth of the area I live in. The West Windsor, Plainsboro sister towns where I live in New Jersey were 30-40% Asian in the early 90s, and they're about 60 to 70% Asian now. I drove the minivan as a soccer coach with 7 kids in the car, and all 7 of them had different cultural backgrounds. So that's what I have lived in, and that's what my kids have grown up in our school district, right? But the idea, the themes of our fear of change and our fear of cultural diversity and our fear of the difference in others, all of that becomes more resonant now than it might have in 1995. So but the book's themes really are about that. It's about our inherent fear of assimilation, of integration, and our fear of change, our isolation, our isolationism. We are that way as nations. We are that way as cultures. We are that way as races. We are that way as religions. I think it's all BS. So,
I am with you on this. I'm with you on this.
In the book, I get to reflect that through the diversity of the characters involved. And I'm an immigrant to the United States, but I came here when I was like 4.5 years old. All my schooling has been through here, but it really was only through the writing and now the talking about the book that I've come to really see little aspects of my own upbringing that I had basically comfortably and casually ignored my whole life growing up, about how people looked at me based on my name or looked at my parents when they were talking to someone at a retail store and they had heavy accents and I could see the store employees' eyes roll because they had to deal with the guy who can't speak English, so those were all kind of things that when I was younger I tended to just ignore for the most part because I was always so arrogant and cocky that I just didn't care. Whatever, you're an idiot, I'm not. Keep moving forward. But then as I'm writing the book, I'm looking at it from the perspective of the characters, and those characters are other people. They're not me. So maybe some of them don't have that same indifference or at least feigned indifference. They don't have that casual arrogance about it that I used to have. And none of this ever affected me in my adult life. Ever since I went to college and graduated college and got a job, none of it ever influenced me one way or the other, negatively or positively. I was never a diversity hire because I'm Latin American, but nor was I shunned or questioned. Clearly, nobody at Marvel Comics ever asked me to change my name when my comics saw print. You know what I mean? And I'm lucky. And I feel very fortunate that publishing is an industry that is incredibly inclusive and really always has been, at least since I've been a part of it since 1983 when I got a job at Putnam Berkeley Publishing. And Putnam is publishing my book. What a shock. And coincidence? Yeah, a little bit. They had the best offer. They had the best offer on the book, but I did also like the synchronicity of it all. So I've not encountered it the way that the characters I have in the book have to encounter it on a regular basis. But I have encountered it just enough to, I think, hopefully make me understand how they feel about it, they being the characters, totally. And I think it's an important aspect of the book because I think by the time you get to the end of the book, and certainly by the time you get to the end of the second book, you'll realize that there's a possibility that I may be writing suburban tragedies that are couched in comedy and mystery. Yes, it was a 2-book deal, so there will be another Suburban Dicks mystery next year. So whether there's more really depends on how these sell. So everybody out there, buy some damn books. But there will be two. There will be two books. The second one's already written. It's being line edited now.
Cool, excellent. So I'm reading the book. You've actually mentioned, there's a lot of humor in there, a lot of sarcasm. I am only a little bit in there, so pardon me if I don't go into depth. And plus, I don't want to give all the game away because you know what?
We don't want to give away too many. We don't want to give away too many of the good gags.
But it's like Andy says something about when she's thinking about the situation when she gets home after visiting the gas station. She says something like. She realizes people will think that's the world's smallest violin playing. Now, I thought that, I've got to be honest, I thought that was a British thing. I thought nobody would understand. I didn't think I'd ever see that in like an international book. You know, do you know what this is?
Really?
That's the sound of the
Yeah,
world's smallest violin. I was like,
that's really common here.
I was like,
That's a very common. Yeah, the whole play me a little violin is a real common saying here.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool. The humor element.
we stole it from you guys, I'm sure, but it's still a real commman saying.
I'm not saying who stole anything or who originated it. You know,
well, we stole your language, so come on.
Well,
just because we speak it properly shouldn't mean.
Did you steal it, or did the fact we conquered 3/4 of the world mean that we gave it away? I don't know.
A little bit of both. Yeah, that's a good point. You're right.
Yeah.
We didn't steal it so much as you gifted it to us.
Yeah. Anyway, Andy, 4 kids, 1 on the way. Does she not have a television in her house? That's all I'm wanting to know.
Yeah, that's a good question. We'll delve into that a little more as we move along. I think that the choices that she has made for herself are interesting to consider because they're not necessarily the choices you would expect a person who wanted to do A and never got to do it would be making.
That's an interesting question. Definitely.
Yeah, and we delve into it a little bit more in the second book, but actually quite a bit more in the third book, if there's a third book.
There'll be a third book.
I think there'll be a third one. I'm hoping there will be. But then the third book is really where a lot of it all comes together in terms of understanding her and the choices that she's made. She allowed life to dictate terms to her all through her 20s. And she's not going to do that anymore. But it starts with Suburban Dicks, and it keeps moving her forward through the second book into the third book as well.
Wow. Okay. Right.
You got to understand. I've had these characters in my head for 25 years. I know their lives. I know their lives for the next 10 years. I know their kids growing up for the next 10 years. I know the choices they're going to make and what they're going to do. I hope I get the opportunity to write them because I think they're fun characters.
So it's a really good point you've just brought up there. And I was going to go to a break, but we'll answer this question first then. When you've got these characters and you've created them, you've got the situations, you've penned them, they've lived a life for you. How do you kind of reconcile that not every character has a happy ending?
Because not everybody's life has a happy ending, and even if you have a good life, that doesn't mean everything works out for you. So, and the other side of the coin is something I learned a long time ago when I started writing comic books is part of your job is to make your characters' lives miserable because that creates good.
I thought you were writing for Marvel, not DC.
Yeah, same thing. It's good drama. It's good tension. I mean, think about it. I grew up reading Peter Parker Spider-Man comics, and how miserable was his life on any given issue? Pretty darn miserable. Well, Spider-Man was the escape for him.
Look who he gets to date: Mary Jane, Black Cat, Deborah Whitman.
Yeah, but look how often he screwed those dates up. I'm talking about pre-marriage Spider-Man back in the good old days.
You can't say that now.
When Peter was miserable and screwing up constantly. Not when he was married to a supermodel waiting for him to come home in lingerie every issue.
The good old 300s.
Yeah.
The early 300s. There you go. All right. Go on.
Yeah, you want them ultimately to be happy, but you know that you gotta write their trials and tribulations because that's what makes for good drama and comedy and everything.
The reason I ask is I read a book predominantly about Marvel, and again, I suppose it matters not what if you're creating a Marvel character, DC, or a prose character, and it was around Doug Moench, who had been told at one point that he had to do away with a lot of the cast of Shang-Chi.
Yes.
And for those that don't know, Shang-Chi, of course, he's getting the movie this year or next. But Shang-Chi was the master of Kung Fu back in the 70s when the sort of Bruce Lee films were starting to become massively popular. Doug Moench had been on the book forever, and the powers that be had turned around and said, right, it's not selling very well, we need to make some changes. And he couldn't do it because he loved the characters. The characters were his characters, you know? I just kind of, when people talk about creations, and obviously you're very proud of your book, and so rightly you should be, because what I've read so far has been fantastic. I smiled, I've laughed at it, you know, so the right emotions are coming through. You know, it's just, if I was creating something and something bad happened to them because it had to happen, I'd be like this. I don't know if I'd have the strength of will to put them through that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I hear you. And sometimes you change your mind and you give them a happier outcome than you might have expected originally. Because you get to the point where you don't feel comfortable doing that to your character. But the other side of the coin, as much as I've seen firsthand how the fiction really affects people's lives, like so I respect that aspect of it a lot, that the work can have a deeply emotional meaning to people at various stages in their lives, because I've seen it from people who've read you know, my work throughout my career. The other side of the coin, though, is that they're fictional characters, and you know they're fictional characters, so a part of you has to be really kind of realistic about that, and also understanding that ultimately the requirements of fiction outweigh the emotional preferences you might have, or they should outweigh it, and a good outcome's a good outcome, whether it's a tragic one or not in fiction. Yeah, and that's the other reason to have a lot of characters in your book, John, because then you can screw a couple over really bad, but not all of them. So then you can go, oh, come on, 7 out of 9 are all fine.
Spot the ensign red shirt. That's right.
Yep, exactly. You got to send some red shirts around the rock every once in a while, you know, just in case, you know.
All right, okay, we're going to take a quick break. Here's an advert. We're talking about, we've mentioned a couple of old school Marvel books. So here's an advert for our vintage show. This is the Old Timers comic book show.
Do you want to find out what makes the professor do his happy dance? Check out the Old Timers Comic Book Show, only on the UCPN.
The professor doing his dance.
I was doing a dance to that jig. Totally.
So the Old Timers Comic Book Show is out fortnightly on Wednesdays. So tomorrow, the 23rd of June, the next episode will drop. And then go from there to talk about comics that are at least 25 years old. So there you go. And it goes all the way from Action Comics 1 all the way up to wherever 25 years ago was. So there you go. Right, back to Suburban Dicks. Do you have any writing influences? The reason I asked this is you mentioned you worked in marketing. Some of the humor reminded me of Peter David a little bit.
Yeah, no, because I broke in. I broke in. Yeah, I broke in right after, like a year after Peter did. So I mean, you know, I started at Marvel. I started at Marvel at 85. No, that's my humor has been a part of my work from the very beginning. Sometimes more so than others. And quite frankly, also in the books where editors would allow you the humor, they could accommodate it. Unfortunately, what I sold the most of and what I may be best known for, which were the X books, were the ones that had the least amount of humor in it, and the amount of jokes that I would write that got cut by the editor because it was an editor who didn't really have a good feel for humor in comics. He had a great feel for drama and pathos and tragedy, but he did not have a good feel for humor. And as a result, you know, anytime I tried to bring some levity and lightness to the X books, it got taken out. So everything was always storm and tragedy, you know? So it's always been a part of my work. It's why I made Deadpool a mercenary with a wise ass mouth, not even knowing exactly where it would go, but realizing I didn't feel like writing the expected tough guy mercenary because that would bore me. So I made him a wise ass, you know, and that played out pretty darn well. It worked out pretty well for the guy, you know. So it's really I don't know, because most of the books I've read by most of the writers I've liked often really lack humor, quite frankly, you know. And I didn't read a lot of fiction work for a very long time, almost 15, 20 years. I didn't read a lot of fiction books. I just started again in the last couple of years. What a shock! After I sold my book, I finally started reading fiction again. And I'm finding that some of the books skew humor and some of the books skew straight procedural or whatever. Rarely do they kind of combine the two. And I honestly really prefer to combine, you know, the mystery, the tragedy, the humanity, and the humor as much as I possibly can. Sometimes it works better than others. Sometimes, you know, you get off too many jokes, you know, and that's just a matter of figuring out your own balance and what an audience's preferences are, you know. And that's where a good editor like the one I have, Mark Tavani at Putnam, comes in, because, you know, he'll catch the parts where you're overdoing it just a little bit. I lean too easily to pee jokes, so there were way too many pee jokes in the first book. So he asked me to cut a few out. There still are too many pee jokes. There's enough pee jokes that one reviewer who reviewed the book criticized it because it had too many pee jokes in it. I'm like, what am I gonna do? She's 8 months pregnant. There's gonna be some pee jokes in there.
Just tell them toilet humor works and be done with it.
Toilet. That's been my mantra. It might go on my tombstone. Toilet humor works.
When it comes to writing prose, and you're trying to go for satire, and you're trying to do this mix of different genres, whether it be like the murder mystery element, you've got the procedural element with the kind of FBI information, and she's trying to like put a Foxy Mulder on it all. How do you manage to sort of circumvent the issues of context? Because sometimes when you read words flat on a page, context can be a little bit skewed depending on how the reader reads it. How do you kind of get around that to make your point that you want to make?
That's an absolutely great question, and I apologize that I really don't have an answer for it.
Damn it!
I write what I think works for the narrator's perspective on what the narrator is looking at, right? The narrator is the one with the snarky voice, and it's filtered through the narrator's the third person narrator's perspective of the individual characters in that moment, in that scene. Sometimes it's meant to undercut what a character is saying, you know, because they may be saying one thing, but the narrator is telling the audience, no, it's something else, you know. Other times it's done to help support what a character is saying or doing, you know. And ultimately the challenge and the difficulty is in not overdoing it, because if you're doing it on every single page, at the time you're writing it, it may not seem like it's that much, because you're writing it a page at a time, you know, and you're in the moment. But then you go back and you reread 20, 30 pages that you've written, and you go, oh, wait a minute, I'm overdoing it, or I made the same approximate joke twice in a 20-page span. That's the difference between comic book writing for me and prose writing, is that the prose writing, it takes so much more editing and rewriting and tweaking, just by the word tweaking, and to the point where you've read it. I can't even tell you how many times I've read the first book at this point, with the amount I had to originally cut, then the amount I cut for the sake of my agent's requests, to the amount I had to cut for the sake of Mark's request from Putnam, to the amount I had to approve cutting from the copy editor, and then tweaking some more of my own. Like we cut a lot out of the original manuscript because I'd overwritten the original manuscript by a lot.
So what happens to that stuff that gets cut? Does it get reworked and kind of Lucasfilmed into the next book?
No, that's a good question. I don't have the experience to be able to know how to do that yet. I have a bunch of deleted scenes or expanded versions of scenes you see in the book in my files. And I plan to do stuff with that down the road, should there be reader interest.
Cool.
None of it really fueled the next book per se, but I also purposefully had several extended flashback sequences in the second book, going back to Andy and Kenny's parents and their marriages, because the theme of the second book is marriage. And that was partially done on purpose because I knew that my page count was going to be a little too high and Mark was going to want me to cut X amount of pages. So I knew that I had the flashbacks in my back pocket that I could cut, because I knew Mark wasn't a huge fan of the flashbacks. So I was able to cut those. But I have them. They exist. They're extended versions of anything you'll see in the second book, just like the stuff I cut from the first book. Some of it's worthwhile. You got to understand, Johnny, a lot of it was crap. A lot of it was me overwriting. A lot of it was me duplicating effort, because I didn't have the experience writing prose with that first book. And the second book was a lot leaner just off the bat. The very first manuscript was a lot leaner because I had more experience doing it. The first manuscript really, when I tell you, it was like 540 pages, the first manuscript, and I had to cut it down to about 390 ultimately, right? So that's a lot of cutting that I had to do, but it just goes to show you that a lot of what I cut was unnecessary, because I just was overwriting and over describing and repeating things too often.
Tell that to J.R. Tolkien.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I read for the first time, although I was rereading The Stand by Stephen King. For the first time, I read that extended version that came out later, which had like 400 additional pages to The Stand, for crying out loud. And after the really bad CBS All Access version of the show, I wanted to reread the book, and I reread the book. And I love you, Mr. King, but I got to be honest, holy smokes, was there a lot of stuff in that book that didn't need to be there. So I think it's a change in also though how audiences are reading and want to read. I think they want things a little crisper and cleaner and quicker. I think our audiences now, because of the amount of visual stimuli we get on a daily basis, are much more adept at filling in the details of things in their own imagination without the need for the writer necessarily to describe it. I don't have to describe everything that's in a room for you to understand that it's a kitchen, or for you to understand that it's a living room, some of the stuff I was joking about, like with Stephen King, was like, 3 pages of a description about a room that's not going to appear again for the rest of the book. And then you go, wait a minute, of course it's very well written description, because he's an excellent writer, but what does it mean to the whole? How does it really advance your story in any way, shape, or form?
Why do I need to know the color of the wallpaper?
Do I need to know the color? Unless the color of the wallpaper says something about the character or something about the character's life, you really don't need to know the color of the wallpaper.
Yeah, definitely.
Let it get optioned for film or television. Let the set designer have to worry about it.
yeah. Don't worry the details. It's interesting how you say we, as an audience, we want things a little bit crisper. We live in a digital world where you can stream a whole series of things. You were saying how when you've written the first manuscript, you have to go back and trim, and you don't realize you've written too much, or you've kind of overblown it, or over exaggerated something. I remember watching Arrow, the TV show, and I was watching it on a weekly basis, one by one, and I loved the show. I thought it was class. And then I was ill for a while, and my friends bought me the box set whilst I was recuperating, and I must have binged like 4 episodes a day on a morning. And I swear to God, the same sort of character traits, the same character tricks in this episode happened again in the next episode. I'm like, have you not learned this yet? Have you not learned that this character is going to do? And you don't notice it if you're watching it on a weekly basis.
Exactly. And think of what a conundrum that is on a creative level, because when they're writing that show, then they're crafting it, they know that it's a 22 episode season, and they'll be appearing once a week, and there'll be months of a hiatus in between, you know, between the fall and the spring kind of a thing. That's a completely different writing responsibility than knowing that you're doing 10 episodes and somebody could watch them all in a day. Right.
Totally.
So a lot of the streaming platform shows don't do those kinds of repetitive ticks, because their assumption is you just watched the last episode 20 minutes ago. You just kept going, right? And Arrow's writers have to say, you haven't seen this show in at least a week. You possibly haven't seen the show in 6 weeks, because there was a break. So it makes for a very interesting dynamic in terms of how you approach the material.
So from a writing point of view for Suburban Dicks, because you've got so many different sort of nuances, so many different influences in there, do you find that you have to be mindful to not over cater to one? Because it's kind of like an ensemble type story, because you've got so many different like elements to it. You don't want to sort of give too much of Andy and Kenny, but then again, you don't want to let the murder crime fall away a little bit. You want to keep everything kind of in focus. How do you manage to kind of, because you've got like your telescope, your lens is only this big, right? And you can only
yes, and it's always a juggling act, and the concern is that you indulge yourself too much in one aspect of what you're talking about or another. And for me, ultimately, and I'll have a better answer once I've gotten to do this a few more times. I've only done it twice, right? For me,
that's
ultimately,
what my mum says with me and my brother.
I think that the amount of work I've done in comic books really helped me, because it allowed me really to focus on the necessity of pace, the brevity of scenes, because you don't have that much space in comic books, so you have to make your points in a quick way. That also serves the greater whole of the story, that also serves the greater whole of the series, and you have to have those beats in mind that get you from the end of this issue to the excitement and anticipation of buying the next issue 30 days later, right? And I think that my experience writing team books and juggling multiple characters and dialogue cadences and having to move the camera around so that the artist can comfortably flow the storytelling through scenes of multiple characters in them. I think ultimately, and it calls again to why it's kind of good that it took me so long to write this book, I think all of that stood me in good stead to do that, to have that experience, because it really helped me. It helped me be comfortable with my pace, much more so in the second book than the first one. But the first book's problems were not necessarily of pace. The first book's problems were me repeating things that the audience already knew, but the characters didn't. So I had the characters repeating things to each other that one of the characters found out 30 pages ago, right? And the audience knew as a result, but the two characters hadn't seen each other again until 30 pages later. So you have them go through it all. And I did that so many times that I had to shortcut and cut all of that, because that's just bad writing, right? And it really helps pick up the pace and tighten everything a lot more. With the second book, that wasn't an issue, and the pace was pretty quick and crisp through the most part, but I chose to indulge myself a little bit in the characters' introspections on the themes and everything else. I think that what helped me with the first book tremendously is that the characters resolving this mystery is an integral part to them thinking they have resolved their own inner conflicts, right? For
Right,
Andy,
yeah.
it is a validation in her mind of who she should always have been.
Yeah.
And for Kenny, it's a validation in his mind of who he was and should be again, right? And as a result, the two things are going in the same direction. They're both traveling along parallel roads until they get to the destination, which is the resolution of the mystery. And that made it easier in that regard because it clicked smoothly that way.
Cool, excellent. So time for the tough questions. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Who's your favorite character in Suburban Dicks?
Probably Ruth. The oldest daughter.
Say that. I was going to say it's either Ruth.
Probably Ruth. It's good. In the second book, my favorite character is Sarah, who's the middle daughter. But in the first book, my favorite character is probably Ruth, who is the oldest daughter.
Sweet, excellent. Okay, from a writing point of view, which do you prefer? Comic books, which is potentially more collaborative, or now being the master of your own ship with prose?
I can't answer that. Yeah. How do you know? Because of course, right now it's prose because it's all new and exciting and it's a great opportunity for me. I've written over 1,000-something comic books in my career, so even if I get to write a character I like and I'm intrigued by, like Juggernaut or something, from a standpoint of breaking down a story and breaking down your scenes and giving your descriptions to your artist, I've done that 1,000,000 times before, so there's nothing about it that is as interestingly new as writing the prose is to me. You know, cool. And now that I'm an author, I just get into like rooms I never used to be allowed to go into now. Like, I was just sitting in a room with Jimmy Patterson and Bill Clinton, and we were talking about how cute it was that our books were right next to each other on this Kirkus review thing that they did, and Bill Clinton said, "Oh, shucks, I've been doing this forever. It's great." So, I'm comic book writers aren't usually allowed in those rooms. Now I am.
Yeah, check you out with your press pass.
Look at me, yes. I have a lanyard.
Have lanyard, will go anywhere. Excellent. So you've already mentioned second book is off to the editors. You must be pleased with that. Third book on the
Who knows? It was a 2-book contract. The ball's in their court.
But you'll have it written. You'll have parts of it done already. You know where it's.
I have all. It's yes, the notes or the notes and the index cards and the outline, rough outline stuff is already percolating.
Cool. So what's next for you then?
After this, I'm gonna have a cup of coffee because I really need an afternoon cup of coffee. I'm still doing comic book stuff. I got a Marvel project that hasn't been announced yet because it's part of a larger thing they're doing.
So you can't come on the show.
I can't. No, Marvel's so strange about how they announce things nowadays. They'll announce it when they announce it, but I've already written it. It's being drawn now. I have my what?
Can you tell me the artist? Can you tell me the artist?
I cannot tell you the artist. No, I cannot tell you anything. They do not want anything mentioned until it's announced.
Fine. I'll just drop the fact that Chuck Dixon told me about his Bane book. 18 months before it happened. I didn't tell anyone, but that's fine.
That's good. No, you didn't tell anyone except on your show just now.
Yeah, but 4 years ago.
I have Outrage, which is my digital comic that I co-created with Riley Brown, which is on Webtoons, and the second season's been a bit of a hiatus because we needed our artists to catch up, but we're starting to work again on it. So hopefully new chapters will be dropping real soon on Outrage. It's a real fun project to work on. I have a third book that I really, really want to write, so everyone needs to buy copies of Suburban Dicks so that Putnam says, "We'd like to extend this contract," and then my agent says, "Oh, good, let's talk," and then I get to write a third book. That would actually be really fun because I've enjoyed this a lot, and I still have a lot more that I want to do with the characters and a lot more that I'd like to do with the story world.
Cool, excellent. Well, Fabian, thank you so much for spending the time with me. I really do appreciate it. The book, guys, is out right now, and as Fabian will be pleased to know, the reviews on Goodreads are now at 4.27.
They went up. I told you it was 4.25 this morning. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Someone heard us talk about Nomad and go, what? And then got and checked it out. So there you go.
No, it's because of this podcast that those reviews went up. It's happening as we're talking, even though it's not broadcasting live.
It will be broadcast live in less than an hour, I will tell you that.
Then it's going to go up to 5.6. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, 5.6 out of 5. Yeah.
People are going to start giving it 6 stars, even though they're only allowed to give it 5.
Excellent. All right, guys. Fabian, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, John. It was an absolute pleasure. It really was.
Appreciate it. Don't forget to check out, guys, the UCPN for all your favorite shows, including the Old Timers Comic Book Show, where we go everything that's a little bit older. You've got the No Price Podcast, which is all about Marvel, and of course the Definitive Crusade, which is your home for everything that is DC. This is Johnny the Machine Hughes and Fabian Nicieza saying adios.
Arrivederci.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.com, all about comic pop culture.